The morning of the Meridian announcement, I stood in the staging corridor of the Fairmont's main ballroom and thought about how much a person can know without saying anything out loud. Adrienne was 10 feet away from me, standing at the edge of the velvet curtain that separated backstage from the rest of the room. Through the gap I could see the audience. 200 people, partners, investors, clients, press, arranged in rows beneath the kind of lighting that costs real money and makes everyone look slightly more important than they are. The table at the front held 2 name placards and a pair of matching water glasses that no one would touch. She had her back to me. Her hair was swept up the way she wore it when she needed the armor of professionalism close to her face. The navy dress was the one she'd worn to close the Callaway media account 18 months ago, which meant she'd chosen it on purpose. I was holding a USB drive in my left hand. It was the smallest object I'd ever carried that felt that heavy. She turned before I spoke the way she always did, like some part of her nervous system had gotten used to knowing when I was nearby. Her eyes found mine, and for a second she didn't say anything. I held up the drive. "The old one," I said quietly, "or the new one?" She looked at it, then at me, and in the 8 seconds that followed, I understood that neither of us was talking about a presentation file. I didn't start at Warde Creative because I was qualified. I started because I was available and because the previous content lead, a guy named Phil, had quit without notice on a Thursday afternoon by leaving a sticky note on his monitor that simply said, "I'm done." His reasons became clear to me over the following 3 weeks, but by then I was already in. Warde Creative was a boutique brand strategy firm, 12 people, 1 office, a reputation that punched above its weight, and a founder who had built it from a single client and a rented desk in 2016. I knew the work before I knew the company. I'd seen a campaign they'd done for a regional hospital network that had run in 3 airports and made me feel something I didn't expect to feel looking at a billboard for a hospital. Whoever made that understood that the goal wasn't information. It was permission to feel something honest in a public space that had stayed with me. I came in as a content strategist, which meant I wrote things and also handled things that didn't have a clean title. Adrienne was direct about this in the interview. "I need someone who thinks before they speak," she said. "The last 3 people I hired said yes faster than they thought. That's not useful to me." She was sitting across from me in a glass-walled conference room, her hands folded on the table, a yellow legal pad to her left that I noticed she never looked at. Whatever she was evaluating, it wasn't on the page. "I have the opposite problem," I said. "I usually take too long." She studied me for a moment. "That depends on what you're deciding," she said. I got the job. The first month was a quiet education. Warde Creative operated at a pace that felt calm on the surface and was, under that surface, relentless. Adrienne set the tone not through urgency but through precision. She moved through decisions with a deliberateness I came to recognize as the signature of someone who had learned, probably the hard way, that speed without clarity was just expensive noise. She didn't waste words. She didn't waste meetings. And she had a way of listening that made you aware of your own thinking in real time. Because you could tell she was tracking not just what you said, but what you hadn't said yet. I learned her preferences the way you learn a language, not by studying it, but by living inside it long enough that the patterns become reflexive. She took her coffee in a plain ceramic mug, not the paper cups the office stocked for clients. She preferred emails to Slack because she liked to read something twice before responding. When a project wasn't working, she didn't say so directly. She asked one specific question about it that made you understand the problem yourself, which was a more efficient form of feedback and significantly more uncomfortable. I cataloged the smaller things without meaning to. The way she pulled at the cuff of her sleeve when she was working through something difficult. Not anxiously, just something for her fingers to do while her mind moved. The fact that she was funnier than anyone outside our office knew, because she kept it calibrated, a dry line delivered flatly at the exact right moment, then nothing for a week. The way she said my name, Griffin, when she needed me to focus versus when she was just speaking to me. There was a half-second difference in the weight of it. I noticed. I never mentioned it. The real shift happened around month 5. We were working late on a pitch for a national credit union, a client that mattered. The kind of account that would let us hire 2 more people, and something in the competitive analysis wasn't adding up. I'd been staring at the same spreadsheet for 40 minutes when I pushed my chair back and said, without planning to, "This isn't actually the problem. The real question is why anyone trusts a bank at all after the last 15 years." A silence. Then Adrienne looked up from her monitor. She studied me with an expression I hadn't seen on her before, not skepticism, something more like recognition. "Write that down," she said. It became the first line of the pitch. We got the account. After that, something about the way she included me and things shifted. Not dramatically. Nothing with Adrienne was ever dramatic. But there were conversations she started having with me that she hadn't before. Strategy conversations, not task conversations. The kind where she was thinking out loud rather than directing. I understood the difference, and I understood that it meant something, though I was careful not to assign too much to it, because she was my employer, and I was someone who spent considerable energy reminding myself of the appropriate weight of things. What I couldn't calibrate so easily was the evening of the Carter Group dinner. It was a client event, formal, held at a restaurant that required reservations made 2 months in advance and featured a menu with no prices listed. I was there handling logistics, seating arrangements, timing, the small invisible machinery that keeps a dinner running without anyone knowing it's being managed. Adrienne arrived late, which was unusual, and she was wearing a deep burgundy dress that I registered and then consciously set aside, the way you set aside something that isn't yours to pick up. She found me near the edge of the room, reviewing a timeline I'd already memorized. "You've read that 3 times, she said. 4, I said. I like to be thorough. Or nervous. I'm not nervous. I know, she said, and something about the way she said it, easy, matter of fact, like my composure was a given she'd already accounted for, landed somewhere I wasn't expecting. She looked out at the room for a moment, then back at me. "Thank you for tonight, for all of this. You always make the invisible things work." It wasn't a speech, it wasn't dramatic. But the way she said it, the specific weight she gave to invisible, like she saw exactly what I was doing and understood why it mattered, reached me in a way I couldn't explain and didn't try to. I told myself it was professional appreciation. I told myself that for quite a while after it was a useful lie. I met Roland Stroud for the first time on a Tuesday in March, and I knew something was wrong before I could explain why. He came to the office, which was the first thing that didn't fit. People didn't come to Warde Creative for casual visits. We were a working office, not a showroom, and Adrienne ran a schedule that didn't accommodate unplanned appearances. He walked in wearing a blazer that cost more than my rent, and the kind of easy confidence that belongs to men who have never been seriously inconvenient to anyone, because the people around them have always absorbed the friction on their behalf. Denise at the front desk looked slightly rattled when she called back to tell me he was there. "He says she's expecting him," Denise said, her voice pitched low. I went out to greet him. He looked at me the way certain people look at others, a quick assessment that concluded I was not someone who required managing. He introduced himself by his full name and title, Roland Stroud, managing partner at Stroud Meridian Capital. He said Adrienne's first name with a particular ease, the ease of someone who had been saying it long enough that he'd stopped thinking about it. I called her extension, a pause on her end that ran just a beat past normal. "Send him in," she said. Her voice was controlled, completely controlled. I showed him to her office, and on my way back to my desk I moved a set of proofs to the shelf beside the glass wall. A habit I'd developed, knowing when proximity mattered without being told. What I watched through that glass was quieter than I can fully describe, but I understood it clearly. Adrienne stood differently with Roland Stroud in her space. Her shoulders were set slightly higher than usual, a thing she did only when she was managing a situation rather than inhabiting it. She kept a physical distance from him that was wider than warmth required, and at one point when he reached across her desk to touch a document, not hand it to her, just touch it, a small proprietary gesture, I saw her chin lift by a fraction, not affection, the unconscious physics of someone holding their ground. He was in her office for 14 minutes. On his way out, he passed my desk without looking at me. Adrienne appeared in her doorway 30 seconds later, expression perfectly assembled. "Clear my 3 o'clock, she said. "Done. Are you all right?" Something moved behind her eyes, quick, and then gone. "He's my fiancé," she said. "We're announcing the Meridian partnership at the Spring Summit. The acquisition will be finalized by Q3. She went back into her office, the door closed with a soft final click. I sat at my desk and stared at my screen and thought about a lot of things I didn't have a professional category for. The Meridian deal had been in the air for months, acquisition talks, strategic partnership. The language shifted depending on who was speaking. What I knew from the documents that moved through my hands was that Stroud Meridian Capital wanted Warde Creative's client roster and its founder's name attached to their portfolio. What I hadn't understood until this moment was the full shape of what Adrienne was being asked to include in the terms. If something about this is landing wrong for you, you're reading it right. Keep going. The night before the Fairmont Summit, there was a thunderstorm. I was in the office until 8:30 finishing deck revisions and coordinating the event timeline, the ordinary work that happens in the margins of other people's important moments. My phone buzzed at 9:15, a text from Adrienne. "Can you come to the Fairmont? Room 318. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." 3 sentences, which was more than she typically used to ask for anything. The last one was the part that moved me. I was at the Fairmont by 9:55. She opened the door almost immediately. She was wearing the kind of simple, unstructured clothing that people wear when they're trying to feel like a regular person. A gray pullover, dark jeans. Her hair down for the first time I could recall outside of photographs. She looked like herself, in the way that the version of yourself without its professional scaffolding is somehow more real and more vulnerable at the same time. She stepped back to let me in without a word. On the desk by the window, a stack of documents sat beside a laptop. The presentation file was open on the screen, the one we'd built together over 3 months. The one that was supposed to announce the Meridian partnership to the industry in a way that made it sound like a triumph. Outside, the storm moved across the city with the particular patience of things that intend to stay a while. She sat down on the edge of the armchair and pressed her hands together in her lap. I recognized the gesture. I'd seen it hundreds of times. I'd never seen her knuckles go pale from it. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to actually listen before you say anything reasonable." "Okay," I said. I sat down across from her and gave her the room. It took her a moment. Adrienne, who could stand at the head of a conference table and steer 12 people toward clarity without raising her voice, sat in the low lamplight of a hotel room and collected herself carefully, like someone trying not to spill something they'd been carrying a long time. "Roland has been moving client billings," she said. "Not all of them, and not obviously, but I've been looking at the accounts for 2 months, and the pattern is there. Small amounts, routed through the operational budget in ways that look like overhead. He's been positioning it so that if the acquisition goes through, those liabilities attach to Warde Creative's books, not Meridian's." The room held the sound of rain. "If the deal closes," I said slowly, "Meridian gets the assets, you carry the discrepancies. And the liability and the audit exposure, and my name is on it." She paused. "My father started this company as a regional ad shop in 1991. I took it over in 2009 when he had his first stroke. Everything we've built, the culture, the reputation, the work that actually means something, it took 14 years to make it what it is. If this deal closes under these terms and an audit surfaces later, everything with my name on it looks like something I was complicit in, whether I was or not." The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. "You need to bring this to your attorney," I said. "I know that." Her voice was steady but thinner at the edges than I was used to. "What I don't have yet is documentation clean enough to present. Roland is careful. The routing is designed to look like normal administrative variants unless you know what you're looking at." She looked at me. "I've been trying to build a clean paper trail for 6 weeks. I'm close, but I'm not there yet." "How long have you known?" I asked. "Long enough," she said, and something in the way she said it told me that long enough meant longer than she was comfortable admitting. I kept thinking I'd find an obvious error, something clean and undeniable. I kept thinking. She stopped, her hands tightened. I kept thinking I'd figure it out alone, because that's what I do. She looked up at me then, and I saw something behind her composure that I'd never seen there before. Not fear. Something more specific. The particular exhaustion of a person who has been holding something too heavy for too long and has finally decided that setting it down, even briefly, is not the same as dropping it. "Adrienne," I said, "you don't have to walk into that room tomorrow." She held my gaze for a long moment without speaking. Outside, the rain came down steady and unhurried against the window, filling every gap and quiet space. "If this is sitting with you the way it was sitting with me, you're not alone. What happens next is the part I still think about." I drove home in the rain and I did not sleep. Not because I was troubled. I had moved past, troubled somewhere around the Fairmont's front entrance, but because there was something specific I could do and approximately 7 hours in which to do it. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and a cup of coffee that went cold before I finished half of it. And I went through 14 months of documents with the patience of someone who has nothing more important to do with the rest of his life. Client billing files, operational expense reports, quarterly reconciliation statements, the subsidiary routing that Adrienne had flagged but hadn't yet connected into a single clean narrative. By 2 in the morning, I had the thread. By 3:30, I had it assembled into a format clean enough to hand to a financial attorney without embarrassment. By 4:45, I had drafted a confidential summary memo addressed to Bernard Chu, Warde Creative's independent board auditor, a man I had sat across from in 3 separate financial reviews and whose integrity I had noted each time as someone worth trusting in exactly this kind of moment. I didn't send the memo. That was her decision to make, not mine. But I printed it. I printed the full documentation packet. I folded both into a plain envelope, wrote nothing on the outside, and put it in my jacket pocket before I left the apartment at 6:15. The Fairmont was already in event mode when I arrived. Florists finishing arrangements in the lobby, staff with earpieces moving with the particular economy of people executing an expensive plan, a registration table near the entrance to the main ballroom where our branding was applied to everything in the way. Branding gets applied to things right before what it represents is about to change. I went to the staging corridor. Adrienne was already there, which meant she hadn't slept either. She was dressed, composed, the navy dress, hair up, all the architecture of her professional presence assembled and in place, and underneath it, visible only to someone who'd spent 14 months learning to look, the particular tension of someone standing at the edge of something they can't take back. She turned when she heard me come in. Her eyes were steady, but the steadiness had cost her something this morning. I walked toward her slowly, stopped when I was close enough to speak without being overheard. I reached into my jacket pocket and took out the envelope, held it without handing it yet. "Everything is in here," I said. "The full account trail formatted for legal review, a memo draft for Bernard Chu. Not sent. Not sent until you say so. Every decision about what to do with it is yours. It has always been yours." She looked at the envelope, then at me. Something moved across her face that I had no single word for, the specific combination of things that happen to a person when they finally see the door they've been searching for and understand that they are the one who gets to open it. I held up the USB drive in my other hand. "The old one or the new one?" I said quietly. My voice was even, but we both understood that the question had nothing to do with a presentation file, and the USB drive was not the thing she needed to answer for. Her eyes held mine. I watched her chest rise with a slow, deliberate breath. I watched the composure she had been maintaining since I arrived, since months before I arrived, really, begin to ease at edges, the way something held rigid does when what's kept it that way finally softens. Not all at once, gradually, the way it always happens when the temperature finally shifts. Her hand came up and closed over both of mine, the envelope and the drive in my hands, just held there for a moment, not rushing toward a decision, just present. "Griffin," she said. It was the way she said it. Not like a task, not like a professional designation. Like something she'd been holding carefully for a long time, and was right now choosing not to hold carefully anymore. I placed the envelope in her hands. The old deck stayed on the drive. We did not make a scene. That's the part I want you to understand. There was no confrontation in the corridor, no dramatic moment where the plan fell apart in public. Adrienne made 2 phone calls from the green room in the 20 minutes before the summit was scheduled to begin. The first was to Bernard Chu. I stood near the window and listened to her voice, precise, unhurried, entirely professional, as she laid out the preliminary findings in the kind of language that closes doors quietly rather than slamming them. She had been rehearsing the substance of that call for weeks, even if she hadn't known she was rehearsing it. The facts were sufficient. She didn't need anything else. The second call was shorter. She turned slightly toward the wall to make it, not for privacy but for the small dignity of facing a hard thing in her own direction. When it ended, she stood still for a moment with her phone at her side and her eyes somewhere in the middle distance. Then she straightened and turned, and the expression on her face was the closest thing to uncomplicated I had ever seen on her. "It's done," she said. "How do you feel?" She considered the question with the same seriousness she gave everything. "Like I've been braced for an impact," she said finally. "And the impact didn't come, and now I'm not sure what to do with my legs." "That's a very specific way to describe relief," I said. "I'm a specific person," she said, and the corner of her mouth lifted, the real version, the unmanaged one. A summit coordinator knocked to let us know the audience was seated. Adrienne told her they'd need to delay the program by 30 minutes due to a scheduling adjustment. The coordinator nodded and left. Adrienne looked at me. "I'm hungry," she said. "It's 9:20 in the morning. I know what time it is." I laughed. It happened quickly, the way it does when the thing you've been tensed against is suddenly gone and your body forgets to stay braced. "There's a diner 2 blocks east," I said. "No wait, no reservation, nothing client-facing." "That's exactly what I want," she said. We walked out the service entrance of the Fairmont into a morning that had come out clean and mild after the previous night's rain. The city was doing its ordinary Tuesday routine around us. Buses, pedestrians, coffee carts, pigeons winning arguments on pavement, entirely unaware that something had shifted in a staging corridor on the other side of the revolving door. We walked without hurrying. 7 months later, the office we set up together was on the 3rd floor of a building that had a courtyard and windows that actually opened, which I mention because neither of those things had existed at our previous address, and both of them turned out to matter more than I expected. Adrienne kept the name, Warde Creative, on the door, on the letterhead, on the small brass plate beside the buzzer. Independent now, restructured in the legal sense and also in every other sense. Bernard Chu's audit had concluded 6 weeks after the Fairmont morning, and the findings had been handled the way these things are handled. Quietly, thoroughly, by people committed to making sure the right outcome held. Roland Stroud's name was not on any of our documents. I was at my desk on the afternoon we signed the new lease, annotating a brand brief, when Adrienne came in carrying 2 cups of coffee from the place on the corner. She set one on my desk without asking. No ceremony, just placement, the language we'd always used between us. I looked at the cup, then at her. "You've been getting me coffee," I said. "You got me coffee for 14 months. I was your employee." "You were never just my employee," she said. And the directness of it, no hedge, no careful qualification, no professional distance buffering the words, landed the way things land when someone has decided to stop being careful about something. She sat down on the edge of the desk across from mine and looked out the window at the courtyard, where a delivery person was arguing pleasantly with a pigeon over a piece of something on the pavement. The light came in clean and unhurried. The office smelled like fresh paint and coffee, and nothing else. "I want to tell you something," she said, still looking at the courtyard. "Okay." "That morning at the Fairmont, when you asked me the old one or the new one." She turned and looked at me, her eyes clear and direct and entirely unguarded in the way I had, at some point over the preceding months, stopped being surprised by. I'd already decided, before you got there. I'd been up since 4 in the morning and I'd already made the choice. I just hadn't made the calls yet. Do you understand what I'm saying? I understood. She hadn't needed saving. She'd needed to know that someone else could see what she was carrying, and that she didn't have to carry it in the only direction she'd been pointed. "Yeah," I said, "I know." "But it needed to be you," she said simply. "I needed it to come from you." Outside, the pigeon won whatever it had been disputing and walked away with the dignified unhurry of something that had never considered the alternative. Adrienne reached across the desk and picked up her coffee. I picked up mine. The courtyard light moved across the wall between us in the slow way light moves when it has nowhere particular to be. "Griffin," she said. "Yeah." She looked at me over the rim of her cup, and in her eyes was the same thing I'd seen in that staging corridor. The unmanaged version of herself, the one that had been present all along underneath the precision and the control and 14 months of careful professional distance. "Thank you," she said softly, "for asking the right question." "Which one?" She set her coffee down. She stood up and crossed the small light-filled space between us with the same quiet deliberateness she brought to everything that actually mattered to her. She answered without a single word. Outside, the city moved through its ordinary afternoon, indifferent and magnificent. Inside, in an office with windows that opened and a brass nameplate on the door that meant exactly what it had always meant. Something that had been building for 14 months arrived, without fanfare, without drama, exactly where it had always been heading. Not because circumstances pushed it there. Because 2 people, each of them careful, each of them paying close attention, had finally simply chosen it. If this story stayed with you, If it reminded you that knowing when to speak and knowing when to stay are sometimes the very same courage, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you're new here, subscribe, because every story on this channel is for people who still believe that the honest choice and the right choice are, in the end, always the same thing.